Welcome back to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon. A lot to get into around Georgia athletics. We're going to talk Georgia basketball. We're going to talk about Carson Beck. We're going to talk about the former Bulldogs that are in the NFL playoffs. We're going to talk about the players that Georgia has gotten out of the transfer portal as January carries on. But folks, we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to switch things up with how we start this episode. And I'm going to start by posing a question to Kipp and Ben. And this is something we actually discussed. I think that was on Monday. I'll start with you, Ben. Where were you 14 years ago? What was Ben Wolk up to 14 years ago?
Yeah, 14 years ago, I was a sophomore in college. I was watching a pretty good Georgia basketball team as well, which I think is where you're leading us into with this.
Yeah, you know where I'm going. Kipp, what about you? Where were you 14 years ago?
I was working at a different company, the worldwide leader in sports at the time, covering a very different Georgia football team, different regime. And yeah, I thought at the time that Georgia basketball was here to stay, and it was kind of a okay, this team looks pretty strong, kind of like where this program's headed, and it was like finally Georgia looks kind of competitive in basketball, at least for a couple weeks. And next thing you know, I got kids graduating high school, kids in college, and feel like we've come full circle again here. And definitely my coworkers look the exact same, and definitely it hasn't been any age difference over the years. I feel the exact same as I did the last time that we had a similar discussion on a website about Georgia basketball.
Yeah, and I think people were definitely listening to podcasts in 2011. I was a junior at Pickens High School. Shout out to the Dragons. And while we're talking about 14 years ago, Georgia men's basketball is back in the AP Top 25, first time since 2011. Georgia comes in at number 23, one of 9 SEC teams that are ranked in the latest AP poll. Georgia 14-2, 2-1 in SEC play. This is a huge accomplishment. And Ben, we've talked about this basketball team the last few years, but what do you think it says about what Mike White, what this crew has done in White's third season for them to be talking about being ranked? And, we'll see how long they stay in this top 25, but I still think it's an accomplishment nevertheless.
Definitely. And before I get into that, a few Travis Leslie, Trey Tompkins, Jeremy, this was like when I was at Georgia, this was like the team, like Gerald Robinson. I'm going to miss some guys, Chris Barnes, but that was a good basketball team. And I even said it yesterday, sneaky good coach, Mark Fox, taking Georgia to 2 NCAA tournaments during his time. Again, I realized it was probably time when it was time for Georgia and Mark Fox to part ways, but for you to look back 14 years and that team was the last ranked AP Top 25 team is really remarkable. But as it relates to this team, I mean, shout out to Mike White. I've made jokes through the years, the Mike White statue is eventually going to get put up next to the Stetson Bennett statue. Maybe those were some exaggerations, but at the same time, I mean, Mike White has built a great program up to this point. I mean, you got to think where it was when Tom Crean left and how far Georgia was really going to have to go to get to even this point. And again, this point is not even nearly to the point that Georgia and Mike White want to be able to get to and what they want this program to become. But, we've watched, I think the last 2 years, Georgia started 13-4. So really solid starts to the season. And even better, an improvement on the start of the season this year. I think the same type of conversation is probably happening now as has been happening with the last 2 years. Once you get into SEC play, it is an absolute gauntlet. Georgia's going to find out tomorrow when they go on the road against Tennessee. Playing on the road in the SEC is as hard as it gets when it comes to winning college basketball games. But what Georgia has done a great job of against Kentucky, against Oklahoma. You got to win those home games where you have a chance. And they won by double digits. They didn't just win. I mean, they won convincingly. They covered the spread. Kentucky's still a top 10 team. Oklahoma was a team that was probably a little overranked given where they were in the net rankings and Ken Palm and those types of things. But it's just a really fun basketball team. The front court with Asa Newell and Somto Cyril is, I don't want to be hyperbolic, and I haven't watched enough teams in college basketball this year to say definitively, but I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a front court that's as talented as that group, potentially a front court that's as dominant as that group. And they're both freshmen, which is remarkable. I don't know how long they're going to be in Athens, Georgia, but the fact that they're doing what they're doing as freshmen, I think that's changed the complexion of what this Georgia team is capable of. I think there's a couple guys, not to put any additional pressure onto them, but there's a couple guys where I think the outcomes of this team live and die on how they play. And I think Silas Demery is one of those. He's played exceptionally so far through SEC play. Dakota LaFew is one of the best pure shooters on this team. And if there is a weakness that I would point to with this Georgia basketball team, it's probably perimeter shooting consistently right now. And I think that when Dakota LaFew is making shots, this Georgia basketball team is going to be really hard to beat. I think that Oklahoma sold out on him a couple of times for three in that game. And as a result, he was getting in the paint. He was hitting a few floaters. He was driving to the rim. And I think that is an element of his game that if he can unlock that in addition to his perimeter shooting, that can be a real weapon for Georgia. But plain and simple, this is a fun basketball team. I haven't been in Stegman as much as you, Jordan, but the environments seem fun. I think that this upcoming Saturday against Auburn, who's going to be the number one team in the country when they come to town, has a chance to be as great of a Stegman Coliseum environment as we've seen in a long, long time. So, yeah, we're leading the show with basketball, and that probably tells you everything that you need to know.
Yeah, Ben, you mentioned that 2011 team and leaving off a guy. I got to shout out my guy, Dustin Ware, covered his recruitment, and he was kind of the facilitator of that team. And we mentioned this basketball program having just flashes of being competitive in the conference. And that kind of pointed out just how, like, the margin for error. Trey Tompkins and Travis Leslie both declaring for the draft after that season, Trey being a second-round pick. I believe Travis did not go selected. Just those decisions, how big of an impact that had on Georgia basketball, knowing that the next season they had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope coming in. And that would have been one of the more talented teams in the conference. So, how big was it for Georgia just getting Silas Demery to come back? Now this isn't just about keeping your roster from the draft. It's about just keeping your roster from turning over from year to year in the transfer portal. So keeping a guy like Silas Demery, keeping Blue Kane on the roster, those are just pivotal moments, I think, for Coach White right now. And you mentioned those big guys. They before they even play Auburn, they had this Tennessee game with Igor Milicic, another, just outstanding big man who's, I think, averaging over 6 defensive rebounds a game. So just another front court battle that Georgia's going to have a chance to kind of, improve its resume. I think that's going to be an interesting matchup just because you got Chaz Lanier averaging like 19 points a game. It's going to be, I think him and LaFew are going to be just, I think it's going to be a shootout between those two.
It's going to be incredibly difficult for this team to stay in the top 25, but huge accomplishment for Mike White, for this team, what they've been building. Think about the fact that, Mike inherited a team that had one SEC win, maybe that last Tom Crean year. And they built it up steadily. And I'm going out on a limb. I'm going to make a prediction that Georgia goes 1-1 this week. They beat Auburn, number one team in the country, without Janai Broome, that the Bulldogs get it done in Stegman. And I don't know if that'll be enough to stay in the top 25 because I don't see them winning at Tennessee. But still, a heck of an accomplishment. And I think you see that Georgia's in the thick of this SEC race. It's going to be super difficult. And I think, I would encourage folks to go look at our SEC poll that we do with several of the other 24/7 sports writers. It is so hard every week, guys, to rank this SEC. How are you separating these teams? And teams are going to beat up on each other. But for Georgia, it's just a matter of winning more than you lose and taking advantage of every opportunity. I think it's going to make for an exciting next few weeks and next probably month and a half of the basketball season. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the news that happened on Friday. Kipp and I popped on Thursday afternoon to talk about Carson Beck going in the transfer portal. We had talked on that episode thinking that Miami was the front runner, and I think probably less than 24 hours after we recorded that, Carson Beck officially going to Miami. Ben, I'm going to let you talk about this first just because you weren't on that episode. What are your thoughts on Carson making this move, him being kind of following the Cam Ward blueprint of going to the NFL draft and then deciding, you know what, no, I'm going to go back to college. I'm going to play at Miami next year.
Well, for starters, it's never a dull moment when it comes to Georgia and quarterbacks. I was down in San Antonio for the Navy All-American Bowl this past week, and a lot of our 24/7 sports folks were around there as well. And there was a lot of talk about that where it feels like there's a book to be written about Georgia quarterback recruiting and the random dominoes and the random names and things that have happened. And now, somewhat surprisingly, Carson Beck has added his name to that list. A guy that seemed like he was going to be, 5 years and done at Georgia, sitting his time, playing whatever. This won't shock you guys at all that I probably have an unpopular opinion as it relates to Carson Beck, or at least in the Georgia sphere, it's probably an unpopular opinion. I'm surprised the reaction that this one has gotten. I guess I'm not surprised is probably the wrong word. Anytime that any fans with emotions are giving reactions to things, it shouldn't be surprising. But, when Carson Beck announced that he was going to the NFL at the end of December, it was known then that he was not going to be on Georgia's roster next season. What everything that happened after that notwithstanding, Georgia was approaching the transfer portal. They were getting Gunnar Stockton geared up. Like when we were looking ahead to the 2025 season, there was no world where Carson Beck was going to be Georgia's quarterback in anyone's mind. And as far as any of us knew at the time, we thought that he was going to the NFL. There were some murmurs. Gabby Aruscio does a great job covering Miami recruiting for us down at 24/7. He reached out to me every day for like 2 weeks, asking me what I was hearing about Carson Beck. And I was not hearing anything, mainly because the communication was not happening a lot between Carson Beck and Georgia. And so, I said to Gabby eventually, like, you clearly know something, and Miami's clearly got something going on, but you're much more in the know on what's going on there. And that was the first trigger for me that something was probably happening behind the scenes with Carson and Miami or whoever else. But when he makes the decision to enter the transfer portal, he waited through Sugar Bowl. He gave it a little bit of time. There was just this immediate knee jerk from, people that get very emotional about these types of things to say, like, I can't believe this happened. And there was even from some folks in the media, and that's not me. Don't take this and run and say, oh, Ben was saying some negative things about other people in the media, because I'm not. I just was surprised by the reaction, even from some folks in the media, that was the negative reaction to Carson Beck. And there were just maybe some underlying things or some personal feelings that people had about Carson Beck throughout his time at Georgia that they finally felt this was now the opportunity to unleash that. It all was just surprising to me because, again, in no world did Georgia expect Carson Beck to be on its roster in 2025. Now, is he going to be playing college football? Are you going to have to watch him play for a different institution? Yes. But whether he was the backup quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers or whether he was playing for Miami, he wasn't going to be at Georgia. And when I think about Georgia and these types of things, like I'm thinking about what is Georgia's roster going to be? What are the pieces that Georgia is going to have to use? And so it just surprised me how negative everything got about Carson Beck. And I realized it was a by and large negative year surrounding Carson Beck in general. I've had to go to bat for him at times in where I think he is as a player compared to where I think the general sentiment about him is as a player. I think it's a smart move for him. Beyond the fact that some of the figures that we're hearing from an NIL standpoint and where that compares to what his draft stock was likely to be, that makes a lot of sense. Miami already has a proof of concept of taking a guy that was maybe going to go to the NFL, decided not to go to the NFL, came back to play for Miami, and maybe translated that into being the number 1 overall pick, translated into being a Heisman finalist. So I think Cam Ward has laid a blueprint that made a lot of sense for Carson Beck. I don't need to talk about the stuff in his personal life to make it clear why that also makes sense for him to go down to Miami, but it was a logical fit if he was going to stay in college. I think that this is not a SEC, this is not the SEC is a much more difficult schedule thing, but I would expect the windows that Carson Beck's going to be throwing into next season are going to be wider than the windows he was throwing into this season. I don't know enough about Miami to know what their receiving core is going to look like next season, but I know that what they've got up front on the offensive line, they've got some dudes up there that are going to be NFL guys, so he's going to be well protected next season. Miami always seems to have really talented skill players on the perimeter, so I would expect him to have some good weapons there, and I think that he's going to go and have a great season at Miami next year. Now, I'll caveat that with saying I think that he had a great season for Georgia this year. It just wasn't as great as it could have been because of some of the mistakes that he had from week 4 to week 10. He turned it over more than we were accustomed to Carson Beck turning the ball over. But again, I said it before, I'll say it again. When he was done at the end of the SEC championship game, he led all SEC quarterbacks in passing touchdowns. And I think that he is going to continue to be dominant passing the ball down the field. I think that he's going to continue to be better in the red zone than most Georgia quarterbacks that we've seen in recent years. And so because of that, I think it was a great move for him. Obviously, it's a great move for Miami, even though a lot of Miami folks probably haven't watched enough Carson Beck to be able to say this for sure. And there might be some that fall into some of the stereotypes. Oh, he turns the ball over a lot. Oh, I've seen so many Carson Beck interception jokes that just to me are, I get it. He threw more interceptions this year than last year. He, at times this year, he was leading college football in interceptions. He also went an 8-game stretch at the front end and back end of his season where he didn't throw any interceptions. So the notion that Carson Beck can't play without turning the ball over is just outrageous to me. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for him. I think it makes a lot of sense for Miami. And I think that if you're a Georgia fan that's in your feels about it, just know that Carson Beck was never going to be your quarterback next year. He was never going to be on this roster next year. So it's fine. Pay attention to what Gunnar Stockton has the capability of being. Pay attention to what Ryan Puglisi has the capability of being. And then, we've talked some transfer portal stuff throughout this window. I wouldn't rule out that we're talking about it again at the end of the spring window as well, even though taking a quarterback at the end of spring that you're expecting to be your starter in 2025 is also probably not the most realistic idea either.
I didn't know that we had that rant coming, but I'm glad that we got to experience it together. Do you remember off the top of your head, Ben, the SEC stat cat, how many, dropped yards Carson lost? It was something outrageous this past season.
I'm going to find it just because I know it'll be easy for me to find it because Carson Beck's dad retweeted it when I put it out there. But the gist of it was that he basically had the most drop yards in the StatCat era, which I think was like somewhere between 600 and 700 yards of drop yards. And he also led the SEC in passing touchdowns. And we talked about this throughout the year. Like there were a couple times where Georgia took shots early in games to Arian Smith and it just didn't work out. And you think about what Carson Beck's numbers could have been, touchdown numbers, yardage numbers could have been at Georgia this season without the drops. And also if you think about some of the opportunities that were missed, how many interceptions did he throw later in drives that would never have even happened had the opportunities earlier in the drives been successful? I mean, we talked about this on the Superlatives episode. I think that Carson Beck will go down as one of the most underappreciated Georgia football players ever. I think that was elevated to the extreme after he transferred to Miami. But, he's someone that I think played very, very well for 2 seasons at Georgia. And they didn't accomplish everything that they wanted to accomplish. But I still think you can look at what Carson Beck was able to do down in and down out in a vacuum and say he's a really, really good quarterback.
I looked it up, Ben, 665 drop yards, which is just outrageous. And Ben, you hit on one of the bigger things that it kind of hit me like an epiphany when Kipp and I were recording on Thursday. It was kind of toward the end. Nothing changed for Georgia on Thursday when Carson announced he was going in the portal. The plan was already Gunner's going to be the guy. I think fans are upset the season didn't go like they wanted it to. Georgia still won the SEC. Georgia still was in the playoff. And I do find it hilarious that people are like, well, he was too focused on his girlfriend and his fast cars. Hey, guys, I'm going to break some news here. Carson Beck was not the first quarterback in the SEC to have a hot girlfriend and drive a really fast car, have a really nice car. Like, it's just outrageous. He could have played better. He forced throws. The first Texas game and the Florida game, he was pressing. He was trying to do too much. But could you blame him? I mean, this receiving core dropped more passes than UAB. They led the country in drops. Like, I think people are upset, and the quarterback position, when you win, it's in spite of you sometimes, and when you lose, it's all your fault. I think Gunner's ready to step up, but at the same time, there's a real possibility that people in 2 or 3 years are like, man, wouldn't it be nice if we had Carson Beck back? Because they did the exact same thing with Stetson Bennett once he was gone. Why? I sure do miss Stetson right now. So I'm right there with you, Ben. Like, he could have played better, but at the same time, Georgia knew what was coming for 2025. Carson wasn't in the picture when he was planning on going pro, and he wasn't in the picture when he decided he was going in the portal instead.
I'll add this too. I feel like, and I said this, I think it was on social somewhere, but Georgia has had 4 straight years of what I would consider way above average quarterback play. I think that Georgia has been spoiled on the quarterback front over the last 4 years. And outside of going into Carson's final year in Athens, I don't think that there were many moments where there was positivity around the quarterback position. And I'm not saying I'm not going to be naive enough to say to fans to be reasonable or to appreciate what you've got, but you just spent 4 years, and I'm not saying everyone. I realize that a lot of times the minority is the most vocal side of it, but appreciate what you've got when you've got it, because you're not always going to have Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck for 4 straight years that get you out of a lot of trouble. And I mean, again, there was so much negativity around that position group for 4 straight years. And when you look back on it, I think that you're going to feel pretty good about the fact that you had Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck.
Kipp, what do you think of the Carson Beck to Miami news, and any thoughts on what we've sort of been talking about on the situation?
I mean, you can make the case that Carson Beck got sold a bill of goods by Georgia. I mean, you look at the fact that Ben's tweet the other day, we've talked about this. Look at what Georgia's offense, the roster, the NFL talent they had during the championship run. And, during parts of that 2023 season, you have to look back at his performance and say, I mean, he did not get a full season of Ladd McConkey or Brock Bowers, and we barely got to see them on the field at the same time. And so, again, this is a positive, supposed to be positive about Georgia. They put a lot of NFL talent, on the field on offense over the last couple of years. And when you don't exactly have that high level elite class of playmakers, it lowers the ceiling a little bit. And so when you look at what he did last season, the 2023 season, for me, it's like at worst top 2 quarterback season Georgia's ever had. And then you go to a season where they cannot run the football at all. That part of your playbook is completely thrown away, which means you're having to spam, downfield passes. You're having to throw passes to guys that, honestly, I mean, Arian Smith leading the team in receptions is kind of the microcosm of this entire team. And even Bobo admitted that's a complimentary playmaker who gave us all, but should have been a complimentary playmaker. And I just go back to that run game and go, they had one game where they had a 100-yard rusher, and it was a true freshman, Nate Frazier, against UMass. And the fact that this was basically the worst rushing attack, not just under Kirby Smart, but the last 20, 30 years. And then you're piling on Carson Beck when he's out there having to do more than heavy lifting. He had to put this offense on his back with basically guys who can't catch passes, who were not catching passes that season. So I think, you can say that Carson Beck disappointed, and he would admit that. But I think that, putting it on him that he was the issue for Georgia is laughable to me. And I agree. I think Georgia knew he was not coming back. And honestly, if you look at it, I think the question is who's got more pressure on him next year? Nothing changed for Georgia, but now Carson Beck is the highest paid college football player ever. So he's got to go down there and prove it. You could talk about how his stats are going to be padded in the ACC, but he still has to go out there and do it. He still has to come back from a pretty serious injury and get into a new offense and learn, throw to new playmakers in the middle of summer or whenever he comes back and prove that, he's worth getting NFL money in college football. Like Jordan said, for Georgia, nothing changes, but yeah, Gunnar Stockton, I mean, you got to go out there and win double-digit games during the season and get a playoff win. That's just the standard at Georgia. That's going to be the standard at Georgia no matter who the quarterback is. Mike Bobo, I mean, Georgia's offensive coordinator as of today, I think as of now we should expect him to be the offensive coordinator next season. It's prove it time, and I think his first year, Broyles Award finalist, top 5 offense. Beck was, getting Heisman consideration coming into this past offseason, but everything took a step back. I think it boils down to, does he have NFL playmakers out there? I don't think any college offensive coordinator in the SEC is going to be able to get, nominated for the Broyles Award without having NFL talent. And I think that's really what it boils down to on this roster. And then, Kirby Smart, he's going to be under the microscope moving forward for the same thing he was like 4 and 5 years ago. What are your decisions at quarterback? Did you make the right choice? Stetson Bennett got picked over time and time again. Todd Monken, now getting NFL looks. He is now the golden child of the NFL. Everybody wants to talk to him now like they did Bid Johnson last year. Well, he told Stetson Bennett he wasn't going to play. So those questions are going to get asked unfairly about Kirby Smart in the quarterback position. But again, like I said, nothing's changed. Kirby Smart's always questioned at the quarterback position because it's the quarterback position at Georgia. So I just think Jordan's right. Ben's right. I think Georgia and Carson Beck have pressure on themselves, but they're both supposed to. I mean, they're high-profile program and player right now. But I think Georgia has added things on offense that where if you're a Georgia fan, you should be excited to have Gunnar Stockton as your quarterback moving forward because I think it looks like he's going to have some pretty strong weapons at wide receiver this season.
Totally, and we're going to talk about at least a couple of those weapons when we come back from the break. I did want to plug, I did a video with Christopher Stock from Inside the U about Carson Beck going to Miami, kind of reviewing his time at Georgia, what the Hurricanes can expect once he gets down there. I know that's on the Inside the U YouTube, so I would encourage folks who are interested to go watch that. We're going to take a quick break, come back, talk about what Georgia has done in the portal so far, talk about the 6 commitments they got, anyone that has stood out to us, talk about the Georgia players who are still alive in the NFL playoffs, trying to fight for a spot in the Super Bowl. We will take a break and then get right back to it. All right, as of Tuesday, Georgia has 6 commitments from the portal. I do want to set you up, Kipp, real quick because Wayne in the comments was asking about Deshaun Purdy from Charlotte, quarterback that Georgia had offered initially. He winds up committing to Florida. He's going to go to Florida, and then he decides, okay, I'm not going to stick around, be DJ Lagway's backup, leave in Florida. It seemed like initially, Kipp, that Georgia might be in play here, but a little bit of complications there. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I think we're learning more, by the hour with that situation. Let's be honest, we had talked about if he re-entered the portal that not only do we think Georgia would have been interested, that would have been a crystal ball to Georgia type situation where we think that's probably where he's headed. But, as it stands, more info came out that not only is he not going to go to Georgia, or it seems like he's not going to go to Georgia, he's not going to be able to go to Georgia or any SEC program during this window, because we had some reporting from our Florida site that Purdy signed an SEC agreement in addition to financial aid agreement, which then prohibits him from going to another SEC school during this window. I mean, there's lots of interpretations here. You could also look at the fact that technically for Florida, the portal window closed, I believe it was like December 28th. And so for him to re-enter the portal, he would be technically re-entering after the window is closed. So it's an interesting situation. It's kind of just new ground for us. It looks like there's new rules and transfer window information coming on every day. Now we have to think, okay, what if he transfers somewhere and then transfers back into the SEC during the spring window? I think I'm not going to put it past a player to do something like that, but as of now, it looks like Georgia will be looking elsewhere for any possible quarterback additions to the roster, because as it stands, we do not believe Deshaun Purdy is capable of transferring to Georgia. Whether or not, Georgia interprets that differently, challenges that, and still brings in Deshaun Purdy, we're gonna watch, because I think right now all the college coaches are at the coaches convention. So I think there's a lot of maybe some delayed reactions to this news, and so let's just see what happens. But again, also for Georgia, it's drop ad week for them. So technically, if you're trying to get somebody in, you kind of wanted to have that done on Monday, but we're not going to put it past the school to figure out a way to get a player into the program. But I think these are the quarterbacks, on Georgia's roster as it stands. They're going to head into the spring with. They'll evaluate the position just like defensive line and the edge rusher position heavily during the spring window.
No doubt about that. Well, as Kipp mentioned, this is kind of looking like Georgia will be done in the winter portal window. Maybe keep an eye out after the national championship game if a certain player or someone surprises us and goes in the portal. But as it stands, Georgia has 6 commitments from the portal. I'm running through them in the order they committed. USC receiver Zachariah Branch, USC safety Zion Branch, Miami safety Jaden Harris, UAB safety Adrian Maddox, who actually flipped from Florida, Texas A&M receiver Noah Thomas, and Vanderbilt running back Micah Bell, who is Dylan Bell's younger brother. I'll start with you, Ben. What do you think of the haul that Georgia has gotten in the portal so far? And is there a player or a couple players that really stand out to you from what they've added?
Well, you don't have to do a lot of rocket science to figure out what positions Georgia felt like it needed to improve. I mean, they took 3 safeties, 2 wide receivers, and a running back that was already sort of connected to pretty much connected to the program. And so for me, I mean, it's a basic answer, but I think it's the obvious answer. Georgia had to upgrade the wide receiver position year over year. We already talked when we were talking Carson Beck stuff about the drop rates and the issues that Georgia was having at wide receiver. And that's not to say that there wasn't ability in the wide receiver room. I mean, I think Arian Smith is probably one of the best test cases ever for he created explosives singularly better than just about anybody that Georgia has had, but obviously his drops got in the way of what could have been an even more successful season for him. And so I think Georgia was trying to find guys that could be explosive, that they feel like could be more consistent when it comes to catching the football. I think Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch are the perfect yin and yang in terms of what you want in your wide receiver room. I mean, you've got a guy in Noah Thomas that's 6'6". They used him in some jet sweep stuff at Texas A&M, so he has the ability to just – I was talking with our Texas A&M recruiting reporter, Andrew Hattersley, about this when I was down in San Antonio, about what does he do well? What did Texas A&M like about him? And he's just a guy you got to get the ball in his hands. It doesn't matter if you're taking a shot down the field. It doesn't matter if you're getting him into a quick screen or something like that in the red zone. It doesn't matter if you're doing jet sweep stuff. It doesn't matter. I mean, he can run the full route tree, but he's just one of those guys. Get him the ball in his hands in space, and he will make a play. He's surprisingly productive after the catch for a guy of his size. We know that Georgia would have liked to have Colby Young and Ra Thomas, and they just brought in a guy in CJ Wiley. Like, they want that big size, length, go up and get it type of wide receiver. And last season, just because of circumstances, they really didn't have that exist on its roster. Noah Thomas fixes that in a big way. He's a name that, I know he was considering entering the transfer portal last year, and if that had happened, it wouldn't have shocked me if he was on Georgia's roster for the 2024 season. That now happened for the 2025 season. I think he's someone that's going to be really, really productive for Georgia. And then Zachariah Branch, I mean, I'm since his first day at USC, I've been a big part of the Zachariah Branch fan club. I just love watching this dude play football. I know that his drops they increased during his sophomore year from his freshman year. Talking with some people that have watched a lot more film on USC and know a lot more of that than I do, think that part of that was a lot of it was quarterback issues at USC this year. And so he's another guy. Get him the ball. Get his hands on the football and let him make plays. Georgia's going to be able to use him in a lot of different ways. It wouldn't surprise me if he filled a returner role, just given the success that he's had in his career already at USC returning. But Georgia wants explosive players. They want guys that will manufacture those big plays all on their own. And I think that in Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, you got two guys that are capable of doing that. And, for all the talk that we've talked so much about Carson Beck over the last month, that, yeah, we've talked about Gunnar Stockton, but we probably haven't talked about what he has done well enough. And I mean, his deep ball is as accurate of a deep ball as we've seen. He has for some areas in the passing game that he is still set to improve on. Getting the ball down the field to his playmakers has not been an issue for him. And I think that they got two guys that they are going to be able to utilize Gunnar Stockton's strengths with their strengths to be able to create dynamic plays down the field. And so had to upgrade at wide receiver. I've said it before, I'll say it again. James Coley can flip a room at wide receiver. And not only did he do that with the 2025 cycle out of high school, he did that with two transfer portal wide receivers as well.
Yeah, I think, Ben, it's Zachariah Branch to me above all else. Was really impressed watching his film. Like you mentioned, he's going to have to clean up the drops, but I think the biggest thing to me, when I think about Georgia's 2024 passing game, when you thought of explosive plays, it was a lot of deep shots and not as much catch the ball in yards after catch. And I was just really impressed with Zachariah's yards after catch. And Kipp, we were talking about this on Twitter earlier on Tuesday, but he's got the sponsorship, the NIL deal with Nintendo. I think he's the new human joystick. Are we cool, Kipp, calling him the human joystick with that?
Man, that is a lot of pressure to put on a young man, but you know what? That's what you come to Georgia for. I think, that's exactly where he can make, I can't say a name for himself, but he can be the next edition of that. And I think, fans have been waiting for that Switch 2 to come out for forever. So if you can get Joystick 2 out there, I think Georgia fans would be extremely excited about that. And yeah, I think the Ben's point, Gunnar Stockton rolling out and throwing to guys in stride. I think that's an area of Georgia's offense that's just completely disappeared, is actually throwing to guys in space and in stride instead of just jumping for the ball and then being tackled right there. And these are those type of playmakers. You thought you were going to get some of that with Dominic Lovett. It never really, we never really saw, that potential realized with him. I mean, Arian Smith was just go route, and good luck, guys. And it was effective. Like, he may not have caught the ball, but he damn sure got separation. And sometimes you get a penalty out of that. But this is a more efficient use of your playmakers. If you can have, guys out there in space making plays after the catch. And I think that's really going to help guys like, Dylan Bell and London Humphreys. Get some separation from those guys where teams actually, have to play off a little bit. And it's not just Georgia's defense playing off the ball. And then, I don't know, maybe the slant enters Georgia's playbook, and you could actually, get guys making plays 5 yards away from a defender that allows them to get some yards after the catch and get some explosive passing plays instead of those 50-50 balls, which, you got a guy. That's another aspect that, Georgia depended on a play, but then lost the capability of having a guy that fits that profile when you had receivers, not even on the team like Ra Thomas and Colby Young. So I think actually having a guy, Noah Thomas, who could bring that to the offense as well. Just again, you want your entire playbook available to you. And I think these are the kind of guys that kind of gives Mike Bobo and Gunnar Stockton that opportunity.
I want to ask y'all about how Georgia has approached safety, getting three different guys, Zion Branch, Shaden Harris, Adrian Maddox. To be completely transparent, I've watched Zion Branch, I've watched Shaden Harris, working on Adrian Maddox, probably have a breakdown on Wednesday afternoon. I like the approach of, hey, let's just try to take several different guys. They needed to fill that room back, losing Justin Redd, obviously losing Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson to the NFL, but also losing Jake Pope. I kind of like the approach of let's bring in a few different guys. We know KJ Bolton's going to be a starter. Let's add some veterans in here and see if one of these guys can stand out. Ben, what do you think about that approach, specifically when it comes to safety in the portal?
Well, like you said, they needed to replenish there. They want to find playmakers, and I think that Georgia hasn't on the back end probably hasn't turned the ball over as much as they would have liked over the last few years. And so I think that you want to bring multiple guys in and just see who has that natural inherent playmaking ability, and the right guys are going to play. I also think you got slightly different guys. There was Zion Branch, which had natural connections to the Georgia staff with Dante Williams, as well as the fact that Georgia was recruiting his brother. So that one, made a lot of sense. With Jaden Harris and Adrian Maddox, you're really getting two different types of guys. Jaden Harris played a lot of snaps for a top 12, top 15 team this year that won a lot of games. I know that there were times where there were probably some questions about his skill set and coverage, or at least from the Miami fan base. That's been their reaction since he's departed from Miami. But a guy that has played a lot of snaps, how how much Georgia values experience on the back end right there. And I think that is going to help him, give him a little bit of an advantage early on. And then Adrian Maddox is a guy, he's played lower level football. He's played at Alabama State. He's played at UAB, but the tools are there. 6'3", 200 pounds. You just look at his highlight reel. He's had some pick sixes that are just flash plays that stand out to you when you watch him. And so I think it makes sense. Like, you want to take three guys, but you don't want to take three of the exact same type of guy. And so I think that Georgia now has some versatility there on the back end, some guys that could play safety, some guys that could probably play star. They have varying degrees of experience, levels that they've played at in college football. And so, yeah, I think that it was a just very strategic approach to how they ended up picking three. They didn't just pick any random three and say, hey, need three safeties, let's take any three safeties. They very meticulously decided which three made the most sense for how they were trying to put that room together.
I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction that Jaden Harris is going to be the guy that winds up starting among them. There's stuff he needs to clean up, especially with pursuit angles and stuff like that. But you can see the playmaking ability there. And I wrote about this on Monday. Kipp did a very good job initially being like, yeah, this is kind of like your Dan Jackson, because I saw a lot of that in his play. Could make big hits, pretty instinctual in the run game, but his tackling's a little suspect.
Yeah, definitely. I think for Georgia going into the spring, it now also allows you to get different looks. What's Joel Aguero look like if you did try him at safety? Maybe Adrian Maddox allows you to play him at, play at star and at least see what Aguero looks like there. And it allows you to cross train, which, that Kirby Smart loves that. That's just his thing. He's like, let's make sure we have these guys prepared at multiple positions because we're not going to go through a season healthy. And we saw that. You saw, KJ Bolden having to move around. Malachi Starks had to play almost basically every position out there. And I think it just gives you a more comfortable two deep. Not saying that any of these true freshmen can't come in just like KJ did and make an instant impact, but you're leaning on less experienced guys more and allowing, them to watch the more experienced guys and ease into everything. And so, yes, competition helps, but just having experience and depth helps as well. And I think it'll help Corey Thomas as well. It's an iron sharpens iron situation there where we think, he has a chance to start at one safety position. But like Jordan said, I think Jaden Harris is going to push for playing time for sure. At worst in that two deep, maybe a starter. But I could see a situation where all three of these transfers end up either safety one or safety two or, star one or star two. They should all be in the two deep. And that's a great set, like a two deep at safety and star to have those six guys. I think guys that Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann and all the coaching staff can lean on and depend on in what it looks to be overall a very young football team.
All right, guys, let's talk about some of the former Bulldogs who are fighting with their NFL teams, trying to make it to the Super Bowl. A very productive weekend of games, especially when you consider Georgia players. With it all said and done, 17 Georgia Bulldogs and their teams are still alive in the fight to make the Super Bowl. But I want to start first with one of the guys whose team did not win, and that was Ladd McConkey, who set a new NFL record for receiving yards by a rookie in the playoffs. 9 receptions, 197 yards, 1 touchdown. Ben, I can't remember if this prompted your tweet about the offense from back in 2021, 2022, but my goodness gracious, like what do you do? And, really Ladd has been just about the only consistent receiver for that Chargers team. I hate to think, how differently things could have been if they had somebody else out there because, you couldn't ask much more than what Ladd was able to do in that game.
Yeah, well, James Cook prompted it, and it's just a sign of how amazing Georgia's offensive group has been in the NFL and also in the playoffs, that you could get confused about which player might have prompted me wanting to say it. But yeah, Ladd McConkey is who Ladd McConkey has always been. That's the craziest part. It's like at every turn, Ladd McConkey has told us exactly who he is as a football player. And at every turn, there's just been slight doubts that have crept in and people have asked questions. It happened in high school. He's productive. College, he's productive. Everyone who watches him, and he's as refined of a route runner as you're going to find at the college level going into the NFL. And I think that's a big reason why he was successful, as a rookie. I talked about this a little bit, or I wrote about this a little bit at Dawgs 24/7, but I was talking with Terrence Edwards. Terrence Edwards was the wide receivers coach, I want to say, for the East team down in San Antonio at the Navy All-American Bowl. And I was talking with him about CJ Wiley and Talon Taylor, who he's just gotten some exposure to, so that I could get his insights. But I was joking with him afterwards. I was like, any of these guys going to be the next 1,000-yard receiver? And he joked. He was like, I don't want to go full Eric Dickerson and say I don't want anybody to be the 1,000-yard receiver, but my playing days are over. It's nice knowing that I'm the 1,000-yard guy. And then he's pointed to Ladd McConkey specifically and said, look what Ladd McConkey has done. You don't have to be a 1,000-yard receiver at Georgia to be able to be a dominant NFL wide receiver who puts up better stats at the NFL level than he did at Georgia. And I think that, again, anybody who's watched Ladd McConkey through the years is so unsurprised by the performance that he had this season. Even, not to say he didn't exceed expectations. Setting the rookie record for receiving yards in a playoff game is remarkable. So I don't want to diminish that or downplay that whatsoever. But again, Ladd McConkey is playing football the way that Ladd McConkey has always played football. And anybody who's watched him knew that he had this in him really from the moment that they've seen him play.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out why people have doubted Ladd all these years. It's because of his name. It's just kind of a funny name, Ladd McConkey. Kipp, any thoughts on what Ladd did in that game and really the rookie season he had?
He was playing through a shoulder injury too. He was banged up. So I think it's it's incredible for him just to watch. A guy that, again, should have gone in the first round. He had plenty of receivers taken ahead of him. So even the NFL evaluators questioned him because of his size. I mean, the pro day numbers and the combine numbers told you this guy is an elite athlete. And the NFL, I mean, we got guys the wide receiver position has changed. It's not, I mean, if you could find a guy out there that plays like Julio Jones, I mean, yeah, you take those guys in the top 10. But as far as the first round's concerned, Lad had everything you could ask for. It was just about, he gets banged up a lot. But then, when he's on the field, he's unguardable. And when he was on the field a lot for the Chargers this season. And if it weren't for another just influx of ridiculous LSU receivers, he would have been unquestionably the best rookie wide receiver in the league. Not the best rookie pass catcher in the league. Somebody else, I think, probably could say he has that title. I don't know. Maybe a different position. And I don't know. It'd be crazy to think that you'd have two kind of guys like that on the same team. But overall, I think for Ladd, it's just you build on that. The whole offseason of working with Justin Herbert, I mean, I think it's going to be pretty prolific. I think he's put himself pretty high on the fantasy draft list next season. I think you're going to have probably multiple Georgia guys going pretty early in fantasy drafts next season. But I think the whole playoff so far has just been a Georgia showcase. And I mean, just last night you had Matthew Stafford just showing people like, guys, we didn't even know if Matthew Stafford was going to play another season. I mean, he is old man football out there, but looking like, I mean, he still looks like he's got it. He's still probably, I don't want to know, like, as far as arm strength, where he is still in the NFL right now. The skills competition being back, like, I want to see it. I want to see the arm angles, because he still just makes those throws where you're just like, I don't know how the ball got there, but it got there faster than, maybe two or three other quarterbacks in the NFL, but his arm was like, at a crazy angle. So in a week of just huge performances, I think it was just a huge showcase for Georgia, and a reminder that no matter how many incredible players there are available, the Falcons aren't going to take any of them.
That's the great note to end that on. I did want to go through, these are some of the statistics of Georgia players from this past weekend. Kipp mentioned Matthew Stafford, 209 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Kamari Lassiter in that game against the Chargers, 2 tackles, 2 pass breakups, 1 tackle for loss, 1 interception. Ben mentioned James Cook earlier, 23 carries, 120 yards, 1 touchdown. Man, James Cook has been super impressive. Roquan Smith, 5 tackles. Nolan Smith, 4 tackles, 2 sacks. Now, guys, we're going to talk about Nolan specifically here in a minute, but did anyone else of those guys we just mentioned stand out to you, those former Dogs who really put on a show? Ben, anyone really catch your attention with how they played?
Well, I'm going to call it out because Kipp and I both made a very similar facial expression when you said it. Kamari Lassiter, man, this guy is awesome. He's another example where sometimes you just got to throw on the tape and trust what your eyes see, because he was never going to be someone that was going to run a blazingly fast cornerback time when he was at the pro day. I think it might have been he didn't run at the combine and then he ran at the pro day, and Georgia has a notoriously slow indoor practice facility when it comes to those 40 times. So I think he slipped further than he should have based on the film that he had, how dominant he was at what he did during his time at Georgia. I think the ultimate proof of how great Kamari Lassiter was look at Dalen Everett year over year, last year versus this year, when Dalen Everett's not the guy getting bullied opposite of Kamari Lassiter versus when Dalen Everett has sort of assumed that role. I mean, nobody wanted anything to do with Kamari Lassiter during his last season at Georgia, and that's why Dalen Everett was getting the target share that he was getting, and why, even though I felt that he was playing better than people were giving him credit for, he was getting bullied a little bit at times, just because what are you going to do? You're going to throw at Kamari Lassiter, or are you going to throw to the other side of a guy that hasn't played a whole lot of college football? And that play that he made the interception that he made, tracking back. I mean, there's not a ton of guys out there in this world that can make plays like that. I mean, his ball skills are incredible. He's just a football player through and through, and he's an easy guy to root for as well. So I think that anybody that has been exposed to Kamari Lassiter through the years was pretty pumped when he made that play.
Huge fan of Kamari. I will say this. I always do the pre-draft predictions on where guys land. 95% of them are wrong. I had Kamari going to Houston with a second round, 42nd overall pick. So that not only came to pass, but he's played outstanding. I think he's going to be a huge part of what's a really talented Houston secondary with Derek Stingley back there as well. Kipp, any thoughts on Kamari or any of those other guys that really showed out the last few days?
I mean, just to steal from Ben, dog. I mean, like, he's the epitome of what a dog is. I mean, that is a guy where it's like the film doesn't lie. I mean, if you put the tape on there, he is just a huge competitor. He's a football player. I mean, the only one that would even compare to him would be Javon Bullard as far as just pure football players under Kirby Smart. I just think that I remember just going into the draft, just thinking this guy might not get taken until like the 50th pick because, you know, they don't like his numbers, but in a strong cornerback class as well. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell made a big play for the Eagles. You know, you had Max Melton's been pretty good. You know, you got Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins. You had guys that were taken ahead of him. But I think that was a guy that you knew as soon as he was selected, like, he's just going to lock in. And you saw the interviews when he got to Houston, they were just like, I mean, this guy's a plug and play starter. You had veterans on that team just singing his praises. And so just to be able to know that you don't have to worry about the cornerback position. You have CB1 and CB2, and you don't even know who CB1 is. I mean, Derek Stingley is an elite cornerback in the NFL, but I mean, Kamari Lassiter is this guy you never have to worry about. And Derek even mentioned that, like, in May. So I just think he was just one of those guys where the numbers fooled NFL scouts, and there's no consistency there. Like I just said with Ladd, the numbers showed you he's an elite playmaker, and he still fell. But I do think, that second round of Georgia players, just incredible selections there. And I mean, I remember, watching a team trade up in the draft in the second round and being like, man, it would be amazing to have a guy, opposite of AJ Terrell, or, maybe even just push AJ Terrell out on the roster. I mean, that trade up, I was like, that's a great fit for the Atlanta Falcons, but no. We got to combine 21 tackles out of our defensive class with 5 draft picks. And so, you know what? It's fine. And then, watching the Rams and seeing Jared Verse out there, imagining what it would be like to have an elite pass rush. It's just, it shows you what some NFL front offices, they're just better than other ones. And I think, why wouldn't you want a Georgia player on your roster seeing what Georgia's done the last 5 years? So big showcase for Georgia overall. Kamari is just another one in a sea of NFL talent. I think most of the Georgia players NFL in the playoffs are just guys that came into the league the last couple of years.
The best thing about that for Kipp is that he's not bitter. Please don't write that Kipp was bitter. There was one guy that I specifically wanted to talk about, and it's Nolan Smith. 4 tackles, 2 sacks. Harassed Green Bay Packers quarterback Jordan Love throughout that game. I honestly thought that was the best game I've seen of Nolan in the NFL. And his head coach, Nick Sirianni, had some great comments. I wanted to credit Zach Gelb of the Zach Gelb Show, who put this on social media. I wanted to play it because I thought Nick Sirianni had a great message about Nolan Smith and what he brings to the Eagles.
I gave him a game ball in there because just his efforts. I love Nolan Smith. I mean, I want my kids aren't going to play defensive end. I know that my 2 sons aren't going to play defensive end. They're not going to have the genes to do so. But I want my sons to play football like Nolan Smith. As hard, like, before my kids go out to play any sport, I say have fun, play hard, be physical, and that guy is the definition of those things. He has fun out there. He does fun with his teammates. His teammates love him. He plays hard as I've ever seen anybody play. And this dude is a physical guy. I mean, I can't say enough about the way he plays this game. He loves this game. You love guys like that. And you love when they can. But that's the credit to Howie and his staff of the guys that they brought in here, right? Because we've talked so much about the guys that love football, the guys that are tough, the guys that have high football IQ. Those guys have a tendency, God willing, to reach their full potential, and I think that's what you're seeing. That the intangibles for Nolan Smith are there, and so you're seeing him get better each week and each time he steps on the field, because when you have those intangibles particularly. You have no choice but to get better. You just get better. And Wash has done a great job with him. Vic's obviously done a great job of putting him in position to succeed. Howie, does a great job of getting him in here. And I think that, it shows you. I think it shows you and everybody patience, right? The guys might not come in and just be, world beaters. Even though they were ones in college, it might not be world beaters right away. It takes some time but we've seen, Nolan grow into this player that was able, the things he was doing today that helped us win a playoff football game. So, I can't say enough about Nolan. I could go on all day about that.
Two things from that, and I want to set you up, Kipp, to talk about it. But one, I don't think it's coincidence when Nick Sirianni talks about Howie Roseman and what they look for in players, that they keep finding it in Georgia players. But two, with Nolan specifically, Kipp, I'll speak from my experience. I don't know that there's a guy I root for more who left Georgia as far as going to the NFL than Nolan Smith, just because of his attitude, his approach. It didn't happen overnight, like Nick Sirianni said, but man, just for me, it's so cool to see Nolan, finally making those contributions like the Eagles hoped he would, and seeing that he's making a huge impact on the team that's got a real chance to make the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's one of those how do they keep letting this happen situations when you see the Eagles just stacking up Georgia players on that defense. And, yeah, you have to remember that, Nolan Smith had that, that pec injury coming into the combine. I think he was a reserve his first season behind a Pro Bowler, Hassan Reddick. So, yeah, as far as just coming into his own, it's, he's taking on a bigger role in year two. And for the coaches to say that, he's now coming into his own when he year two and he had 6.5 sacks. I pray for days where the Falcons have pass rushers for 6.5 sacks. But the thing about Nolan Smith is that he's the best edge setter Georgia really ever had. And you look at that, when he left Georgia, that's been an area of concern for Georgia since then, is being able to set that edge and set your teammates up, to attack the run game. And that play where he just crashes into the guy, that's just like a coach's dream to see your guy play unselfish football like that. But he also just had a big statistical game too. This could be a game that kind of turns him into a superstar. But he had that. No one had that quote after the game where it just reminds you of just like how much he loves the game of football. But the fact that he just always seems to be a source of light, is that he said, "I'm supposed to be on the port. I'm supposed to be on the graveyard shift right now, working and anchoring down boats and latches. I just want to make my mama proud and make the 10 guys next to me proud." That's just pure Nolan Smith right there, for him to have a quote like that after the game. For him to, he's basically saying, I'm a lighthouse. I'm making sure that my teammates make big plays, and to be able to have that kind of role, but also, be disruptive like he was. He could just be unlocking that potential. And just another reminder, he was the Spark champion. He was a freak coming out of high school. That's why he was a 5-star. So I think, he's 23 years old. He's set up to have just a monster year next season. But he's enjoying the fruits of his labor right now. And congrats to the Eagles. That defense is stacked. I hated seeing Nakobe Dean get hurt on a big play again. Nolan's going over to congratulate him. You kind of immediately knew that it was a tough injury. He's a guy that when he's on the field, you can lock him in as a football player as well. Just got to, stay healthy. But for Nolan, huge game. And I think it's just the rest of the country seeing what Georgia's coaching staff and hopefully most of its fan base always knew.
Ben, what do you think about what Nolan brought to the table and just what, he has done and what he means on that Eagles team?
Well, I know you showed the press conference clip. I've got the mouth of a sailor, so I loved the Sirianni locker room clip where he was just screaming, "I effing love this guy. I love this guy," talking about Nolan Smith. And similarly to a lot of the stuff that I just said about Kamari Lassiter, like, he's a very easy guy to root for. Like, if you've been around Nolan Smith at all, you want to see him be successful in life, obviously on the football field, but just in life in general. He's, like everything Kipp just said from a talent standpoint, it was always there. He was always productive. And I think just the way that he's wired, like, you're not going to come across many people that have as much energy, positive energy, as Nolan Smith has. And I think that that's why you've got your head coach saying the things about you the way that you do. Look, the Eagles are not short on talent. They've got a lot of dudes that are game changers across the board on offense and defense, but he was going above and beyond talking about Nolan Smith in that way. And so I just think, again, like I said about Ladd McConkey, Nolan Smith has always been this guy. That's who he was from the time he was a freshman, sophomore in high school. Like, he was a high energy guy that everybody rooted for, that, is going to just on the edge. He's going to set the edge. And when he's going after the passer, like, he is going to be going after the passer with his hair on fire. And again, I'm not to rub any salt in the Falcons' wound. I know every time we talk this NFL stuff with Kipp, he just can't help himself. He always thinks about the fact that what are the Falcons thinking? But that's a guy that the Falcons could really, really use right now, and they would have had every opportunity to get him.
It's funny, me and Kipp, I think, have different opinions when it comes to the Georgia players, because Kipp desperately wants them, and I get it. But two, like a few weeks ago when he mentioned Jalen Walker, I want them not to go to the Falcons for their own safety, for their own success. Pull an Eli Manning if you got to, because I'd love to see them play for my favorite franchise. But, more often than not, it's probably for the best if they go elsewhere.
They could be what puts the Falcons over the top. This is a franchise that, again, bottom 5 franchise in the league, not taking Georgia players. That could be the recipe for success. That could be what gets them, into respectability in this league. And again, why not us? Do Falcons fans not deserve to have Georgia players on their roster to root for? Maybe sell a couple jerseys here and there. And, I don't know. Maybe we could see what the playoffs are like again.
I'll also add Humongous in the comment section did point this out, and I didn't know the specific number, but 9 defensive UGA players in that game between the two teams, Eagles and Packers. I don't know if I need to fact check Hugh on that one, but
10.
Yeah, I think he said 10. He came back after that and said 10 defensive players. Unreal. All right, before we get out of here, Ben, you mentioned a few times on this episode that you were down in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. We got something special we're cooking up on Thursday. Wanted to set you up to talk a little bit about this, what our Thursday episode is going to look like.
So we got a really great reception from the signing day show that we did. We had some signees that came on. We got to do some interviews, just get them in a more laid back way, not drilling them with recruiting questions and things like that, but just talking to guys that are going to play football at Georgia. And so we've had this vision for a while, and I've wanted it to be the perfect time so that we could have the perfect final product show. And that's just an realistic expectation for it. But we want to start doing something on a more regular basis. I'm not signing us up for a specific interval or cadence that we're going to be doing the show on yet, but the better reception that we get, the better guests that we get, the more often that we're going to be able to do it. But we're going to start trying to do a more recruiting centric show. We know that there are some people that are just nuts about recruiting all the time. And, the relationships that we build with some of these guys allow us to do some interviews that other people just don't have the ability to do. And so we're going to have our first one of those on Thursday. I have a one-on-one with a Georgia signee that you're going to get a chance to hear from, only about 10 minutes or so not a super in-depth interview, but we'll talk some recruiting on the front end. We'll have that interview with the mystery signee that I'll save until we get there on Thursday. We might tease it a little bit beforehand. We'll see how that goes. And then we'll just talk some other recruiting stuff after that interview as well. I really do want you all to tune in, just because, like I said, the better reception we get, the more guests that we're going to be able to convince to come on and do these interviews as well. I think it has an opportunity, when we're talking about this a year from now, to be even better than it's going to be on Thursday. But I've been talking with Jordan about doing this for a while, and I've hesitated just because, again, I want it to be as good of a show as it can be, and I just need to accept the fact that it's going to be better as we continue and as we go on and as we learn from our experiences. But that signing day show really kind of gave me the boost that I needed to say, all right, let's just start doing this. And so, yeah, tune in on Thursday because I think it's going to be fun, and you're going to get to hear from someone that I know that a lot of Georgia fans are super, super excited about.
Super excited to start these recruiting podcasts. I think they're going to make for great content, and Ben's all over it. And I know that it's going to be fun to be along for the ride. Well, we will wrap it up right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, who watched or listened to it after the fact. Be sure to subscribe to Dawgs247.com. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Go to our YouTube. Go to our TikTok, at least for maybe the next week or so. We'll see if that thing's still around. Go subscribe because we've got all the football content deep into men's basketball coverage now, especially with the number 23 ranked Bulldogs making some noise and getting ready for a big week of basketball. So we will end it right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.